This video will talk about CVP, cost volume profit analysis. This is a very, very powerful tool, although it's a fairly simple tool to use. If you understand it well, you can shortcut decision making tremendously without sacrificing any of the quality of that decision making. So if we go back to our original graphs from the first week, we're going to have a total cost that's going to start somewhere above zero. So this represents our fixed costs here. And then our variable costs will be represented by a line that slopes upward. Okay, so this is our total cost line. Then our revenues will start at zero, because if we don't sell anything, we don't get anything. And then we know that our revenue line needs to be steeper than our cost line. Otherwise, the more we sell, the more we lose. And so down this point right here is known as break even. And this will be loss down in this region. And up here will be gain. All right. So that's the basic graph of what's going on. Let's take a look at it mathematically. And so we're going to have profit is going to equal my sales revenue minus my variable costs, and that's in total, minus my fixed cost. Okay. Now, so sales revenue can then be broken down to the selling price minus the variable cost per unit times N, or the number sold. All that minus my fixed cost. Now, as it turns out, this selling price minus variable cost has its own name. That's contribution margin. Contribution margin equals selling price minus variable cost per unit is contribution margin. So our equation now becomes profit equals the contribution margin per unit times the number of units sold minus fixed cost. All right. And so let's say that to get to this break even, our profit equals zero is going to equal contribution margin times minus fixed cost. So I get my fixed cost equals contribution margin times N. Now remember, this is break even, so profit is zero, and that goes away. And so I just get this fixed costs divided by the contribution margin per unit is going to equal the number of units that I have to sell. All right, so let's plug some numbers in here and work it out. Let's say that our selling price equals 12, our variable cost per unit equals 8, and our fixed cost equals 2,000. So plugging that all back into our formula, we're going to go for break even. So 0 is going to be selling price minus variable cost times N minus fixed cost. We're going to do that contribution margin. So we've got equals contribution margin times N minus fixed costs. So 12 minus 8 is 4 times N minus fixed costs equals 0. So we've got fixed costs equals 4 times N. So fixed cost was 2,000 divided by 4 equals N equals 500. So I break even at 500 units on that. Now, sometimes, like if I'm a big store, like say, like a Dillard's or a HEB or something like that, I don't know what my, I've got lots of different things that I'm selling, so I have to use averages. And the way we can get that is we take our sales revenue minus all of our variable costs, and that will give me and this is sales revenue in total now, minus my variable costs in total, and that will give me my contribution margin total, right? Now, you're just going to have to read the context of that. This type of accounting was developed in the 1910s and 20s, and so we're not going to change the terminology. We use the term contribution margin for total. We use the term contribution margin per unit, and you're just going to have to judge by the context which one is being talked about. But then if I take my contribution margin in total and divide it by my sales revenue, I'm going to get something that is called contribution margin ratio, and it's generally abbreviated contribution margin percent sign. Okay, so then I can do this same thing. I can do it per unit, by the way. Here it works out the same. My selling price is 12 minus 8 is 4. 4 divided by 12. So my contribution margin is 0.333. All right. So then I take my 2,000 fixed cost, just like I did here, divide it by 0.333. And I'm going to get 6,000. Okay. Well, 6,000 doesn't equal 500. This is in dollars. This is in units. Okay, so if I use this example above, if I divide that by 12, because the selling price is 12, I get 500 units. And so I can do the same thing. I just know that I'm going to get contribution margin ratio versus contribution margin ratio is going to give me the answer in sales dollars, and contribution margin is going to give per unit is going to give me the sales in units that I need to do. All right, so let's work a few examples from your textbook on this, and we'll get into some fun things that we can do with contribution margin on that. Okay, so we'll start with exercise 9-21. We've got Conley Inc. as a manufacturer of quality electric ice cream makers, has experienced steady growth in sales over the past few years. Because her business has grown, Jan DeJaney The president believes she needs an aggressive advertising campaign next year to maintain the company's growth. To prepare for the growth, the accountant prepared the following data for the year. We have direct labor, direct materials, and variable overhead. Our total variable overhead is 34. Total variable cost, is $34. Fixed cost manufacturing of 82,500, selling of 42,000, administrative 356,000 for a total fixed cost of 480,500. The selling price per unit is $67. If the costs and sales price remain the same, what is the projected operating profit for the year? Okay, so the quick way to get this operating profit for the year is to take our selling price of 67 minus our total variable costs of 34. That's both of those are given to us in the problem. So that's going to be $33. We're going to multiply 33 times the number of units sales, 30,000. We're going to have 990,000. We then subtract the total fixed cost, the 480,500. Gives us 509,500. That's operating income. Operating income doesn't take into account extraordinary items or income tax, stuff like that. That's just our operating income. So that's part one. Part two is what is the break-even point in units for the year? So once again, we're going to take our 33. We'll take the 480,500 divide by 33. And it says round your answer up to the nearest whole unit because we can't sell partial units. So 480,500 divided by 33 is 14,561. It's 60.606. So 561. That's how many units we have to sell to break even. Jan has set the sales target. This is part three. Jan has set the sales target of 35,000 ice cream makers, which she thinks she can achieve by an additional fixed selling expense of 200,000 for advertising. All other costs remain as per the data in the table. What will be the operating profit if an additional 200,000 is spent on advertising and sales rise to 35,000 units? Okay, so we take the 35,000 minus the 30,000. That's going to equal 5,000. So we've got 5,000 additional units times a contribution margin of 33 is 165,000 of additional contribution margin minus our additional fixed cost of 200,000. We will go down in operating income by $35,000. Let me prove that to you. 35,000 times 33 is 1,155,000 minus 480,500 plus 200,000 is 680,500. Is 474,500. Okay, so we had an operating income of 509. Now we have an operating income of 474. Okay, so that wasn't a good plan. Now, let me do say there are times in some businesses where market share is more important than net income, at least in the short term. Um, we see that in the software industry where it becomes winner take all or winner take most. There have been a number of competitors to Twitter. There was Truth Social, there was Parler. None of them have taken off. So we get that. We tend to get that in the tech industry where it's, market share is more important. Then once you get the market share, then you can worry about the profit potential of that. And so just be aware you have to look holistically. You can't just look at a number and say, oh, don't do that, right? So number 4, what will be the new break-even point if the additional 200,000 is spent on advertising? And then it asks us to prepare a contribution margin format income statement to prove it. So we simply take our 680,500. So we're just going to add. We're going to add 200,000 to this number. So 680,000 divided by 33, and we get we now go up to 20,622. 21.2. 22 is our new break even on that. And then it asks us for a contribution format income statement. So our revenues, or to prove that, so we'll have revenue is going to be 20,622 times 67 is 1,381,674. We're going to have our total variable costs, which we're told are $34. So 20,622 34 times is 701,148. That's going to give us our contribution margin of 680,526 minus our fixed costs, 680,500, give us 26 operating income, which is the break even because we had to round up, right, to get break even. So there's our contribution format income statement. And it says if the additional 200,000 is spent for advertising next year, what is the sales level in units needed to do the current years? Okay. So we know we sold 30,000. I'm going to show you the quick way to do this. We know we had 30,000 before. So what we do is we take the 200,000 and we divide it by the $33 contribution margin. That's 6060, so 6061. So 36,061. Let me go ahead and do a contribution format income statement to prove that. we'll have our revenue will be 36,061 times $67 is 2,416,087 minus our variable costs 34. Will be 1,226,074. That'll give us our contribution margin. $1,190,000 minus our fixed costs of 680,500. Right, the 408 plus the extra 200. And that came out to 509. What did I mess up here? What did I miss? Oh, that's right. 509,500 was our operating income up here. 509,513. Again, that rounding up. So yeah, and when we did our income statement up here, it matches our income down here. So that's correct. All right. I thought I made a mistake once, but I was wrong. Okay, so that's exercise 9-21. Let's do 9-22. It's talking about machine replacement. Vista Company manufactures electronic equipment. It currently purchases the special switches used in each of its products from an outside supplier. The supplier charges Vista $2 per switch. Vista CEO is considering purchasing either machine A or machine B so the company can manufacture its own switches. The data are as below. For each machine, what is the minimum number of switches that Vista must make annually for total costs to equal outside purchase costs? Okay, so our outside purchase cost is $2 per switch. So we're going to put 2 times N equals 135 plus 0.65 N. All right, so now we've got to get N, the N's on the same side, so we get 2 N minus 0.65 N equals 135. So that's 1.35 N equals 135. N equals 135. 1.35 equals, should be 100,000. So that's machine A. Machine B will be 2N equals 204 plus 0.3N. So now we'll have 2N minus 0.3N equals 204. 1.7N equals 204,000. N equals 204 1,000 divided by 1.7. So we need 120,000 units there for machine B. What volume level would produce the same total cost regardless of machine purchase? So now we just set those two equations equal to each other. 135 plus 0.65 N equals 204 plus 0.3 N. Get the total costs on one side, and that, so we've got 0.65 N minus 0.3 N equals 204 minus point, or minus, not point, 135. Okay, simplify that. We got 0.35 N equals 69,000. So N is going to equal 69,000 divided by 0.35. $197,143. We will be indifferent as to which machine we buy. What is the most profitable alternative for 200,000 switches? That would be machine B. I can tell you that. Which of the two alternatives would you recommend? It depends on which. Well, let me go ahead and do this. I'll show you this. So we've got 135 plus 0.65 times 200,000 is going to equal 130,000 plus 135 is 265,000. That's machine A. Machine B would be 204,000 plus 0.3 times 200,000. So 0.3, 60,000. Machine B would be 264,000. And continuing to buy from the supplier would be 400,000. Right. So machine B would be the best choice at 200,000, although only by $1,000. Which of the two decision alternatives would you recommend? It depends on which way your variation is most likely to go. If you're if you're looking at 200,000 units and you think it could grow up dramatically from here, then you probably want B. If you're looking at 200,000 and say, yeah, there's a chance we won't hit that many, then you probably want machine A. On that machine A, because of the lower fixed cost and the higher variable cost, has a greater room for greater room in case your projections are off on the downside. So, if you're risk adverse, you'll probably go with machine A. If you believe that you're understating everything, you'll go with machine B. All right. Let's go ahead and look at exercise 9-23. We've got structuring sales commission. Questar Electronics, a producer of a wide range of customer products, is facing increasing competitive pressures from foreign producers. In response, Questar is re-examining its overall management control system, including the way the company compensates members of its sales force, who currently earn a 10% commission on sales. Below are highly condensed data for the two represented products. Okay, remember now that sales commission is not a manufacturing cost, right? So when we have a 10% sales commission, so alpha, the selling price is $100 per unit, variable manufacturing costs are 80, and the manufacturing contribution margin is 20. If we take a variable selling cost of 10%, that would be another 10, giving us contribution margin of only 10 after the fact for alpha. For omega, we'd take 125, so that would be a sales commission of $12.50 at 10%. And so we end up with a contribution margin of only $2.50. The manufacturing contribution margin minus the other variable cost gives us our total contribution margin. So what is the contribution margin for each product? So we've got for alpha, we've got 100 minus the 80 gives us 20, minus 100 times 0.1 is 10, gives us contribution margin of 10. For omega, we've got 125 minus 110 is 15. It was 125 times 0.1 is 12.50, gives us $2.50 contribution margin. Which of the company's products will likely be more aggressively promoted by the company's salespeople? Oh, it's going to be Omega, right? They make $12.50 a sale versus $10 a sale, so that's an extra 25% per sale. But they're going to do that. And can you suggest alternative incentive plan, one that would better align employee and corporate interest, one that would motivate more goal congruent behavior? Well, one of the things you could do is base your commission off your manufacturing. So you could say, let's say you could say 50% of the manufacturing contribution margin. So you'd still end up with the 10 there, but then you'd only end up with 750 on the omega, and that would raise the contribution margin to 750. That's one thing you could do. There's a lot of things you can do with that. So that's that basic question. All right. Let's jump over to 9-26. On that one, for the most recent year, Triad Company had fixed costs of $240,000, variable costs of $75 per sales. Revenue earned $70,000 of income after taxes and had an income tax rate of 35%. And it wants to know what was our before tax income. So if we had 70,000 after taxes, we divide that by 1 minus the tax rate, which we are told is 35%. So we'll have 70,000 divided by 0.65 is going to be 107,692 and 31 cents rounded. That's our pre-tax income. Okay. the total contribution margin. So we would take the 107,692.31. We would simply add the fixed cost that's given to us of 240,000. We'll get 347,692.31 is our total contribution margin. And then our total sales. So if variable costs are 75%, that means our contribution margin ratio is 25%, right? Variable cost ratio and contribution margin ratio have to equal. So we've got 347,692.31. Divide that by 0.25, the contribution margin ratio. We had sales of 1,390,769. I'm just going to knock off the decimal point after that. So that's our total sales. And what is the break-even point in dollars? So we'll take the 240, right? That's our fixed cost, divided by the contribution margin ratio of 25%, which we had to calculate based on the variable cost margin. So 240. We need 960,000 in order to break even. Okay, let's go ahead and do number 27. Cohen Company produces and sells socks. Variable cost is $6 per pair. Fixed cost is $75,000. The selling price is $10 a pair. So our contribution margin equals 10 minus 6 equals 4. So we want the break even in units is 75,000 divided by 4. We get 18,750 pair of socks to break even. The break even point in sales dollars, two different ways you can do that. You can multiply this by 10, the selling price, gives you 187,500. The other way you can do that is by the contribution margin. So we take the 75,000 and divide it by 0.4, because 4 is contribution margin divided by selling price, 10 is contribution margin ratio. So we get a 0.4 contribution margin ratio. And that's 187,500. So either way works with that. The units required to make a before tax profit of 40,000. So all you do on this is you add the 40,000 to the fixed costs and divide it by the 4. If you go back to our formula, when we showed break even, we showed a profit of 0. If you go back through that whole thing, put a profit of 40,000, you'll see that that's just what we're doing, is we're adding the fixed cost over here. So that's going to be 115,000 divided by 4 is going to be 28,750 units to make 40,000. And the sales dollars required to make a before tax profit of 35,000. So now we'll take the 35,000 plus the 75,000 and divide it by the 0.4, the contribution margin ratio. Since we'd have to redo this one, it'd be easier just to do it this way. And that gives us 275,000 sales dollars in order to reach a before tax profit of 35,000, and the sales in units and dollars required to make an after tax profit given a tax rate of 35%. Okay, so now we want 25,000, and we divide that by 1 minus the tax rate plus the 75,000, and all of that gets divided by the 4 contribution margin. Now, why do we only put the after-tax profit here over the 1 minus the tax rate? Because in America, we pay an income tax on our incomes, right? And so until we break even, until we covered all our fixed costs, we don't have to pay tax. Now, most European countries, they do have an income tax also, but they have a value added tax. So they pay on everything. And so over there, you would have to put the 1 over the tax rate under both of these in order to account for the value added tax. But here we have an income tax and we don't have a value added tax. So we take the 25,000. My 1 minus the tax rate is 0.7. The tax rate is 30%. So 1 minus 0.3 is 0.7. We end up with 35,714 and 29 cents plus 75,000 over 4. And that's going to be 27,679, rounding up. Then they ask it for it in sales dollars. Well, that's times $10 a piece, 276,790. That's the easy way. Or we can do this. Take the 35,714.29 plus 75,000 and divide it by the 0.4 contribution margin ratio. And we get 276,785. So that's the rounding. The difference, the $5 difference there is the rounding. No big deal. All right. So that takes care of that. 2 more things to cover in this chapter. One is margin of safety, and the other is degree of operating leverage. So let's see if we can find margin of safety here. 9-31 is a margin of safety problem. We've got units sold 1,000, price $10, sales 10,000. Okay. Variable manufacturing cost 4,000, fixed manufacturing cost 2,000, variable selling cost 1,000, fixed administrative cost 1,000. Using the data provided, compute the margin of safety and margin of safety ratio. All right. So I'm going to put this in a contribution format income statement. This is 9-31. So we've got our revenue of 10,000. Then we have our variable costs. So we've got our variable manufacturing costs of 4,000, variable selling costs of 1,000. So our total variable cost is 5,000, giving us a total contribution margin of 5,000. Fixed manufacturing costs of 2. So our fixed manufacturing costs were 2,000, fixed administrative costs were 1,000. So that's 3,000. So we've got operating income of 2,000. All right. So to calculate that's margin of they want margin of safety in. So operating income is 2,000. So we need break even. We've got 3,000 divided by, and I'm going to use the contribution margin ratio of 50%, right? 5,000 divided by 10,000 is 0.5. That's going to give us 6,000. So we take the margin of safety is very easy. We take the 10,000 actual sales revenues, subtract the 6,000 break-even sales revenues, gives us 4,000 margin of safety. Now let's see if that works out. 6,000, so that would be break even. Variable cost, or 50% of that, is 3,000. Gives us 3,000 minus fixed cost of 3,000, and that would give us break even. So our margin of safety is 4,000, and then margin of safety ratio would be 6,000. 10,000 divided by 6,000. Is going to be 1.667. Subtract the 1 gives you 0.667. So we were 2/3 over our margin of safety ratio was 1.667. 2/3 over. Okay, so that's margin safety. Very easy. It's just how many more did you sell than break even. The one thing I will point out on this is you can use margin of safety either after the fact, like we did here, and they calculate, or you can do it when you're budgeting and say, if we sell this much, what will our margin of safety be? So you can do it before the fact or after the fact, either one. And then finally, the degree of operating leverage, 9-32, is a degree of operating leverage. Okay, Tasty Cream and Crispy Cake are both producers of baked goods, but each follows a different production strategy. The difference in their strategies results in differences in their cost structure, as shown below. And so their sales are 20 and 15,000. Unit price is 6 and 8. Variable cost per unit is 3 and 3. Fixed cost 30,000 and 40,000. And it says compute the operating income and degree of operating leverage for each company. Okay, so we'll take the Tasty Cream first. TK. Estimated sales in unit is 20,000 times 6 is sales is going to be 120,000. Variable cost per unit is 3. Um, so that's going to be half of that, or 60,000. Gives us contribution margin of 60,000. Take away the fixed costs of 30,000. Gives us operating income of 30,000. Yeah, I don't like problems where you end up with a lot of double numbers, because it's like, where'd that number, when we start doing stuff. All right. So the degree of operating leverage is the contribution margin of 60,000 divided by the operating income of 30,000, and that's going to equal 2. So that means, what happens if I increase my revenues, let's say by 25%, and all the rest of the cost structure stays the same? I will have 2 times 25% increase in operating income. Let me go ahead and prove that. A 25% increase would be 150,000 in sales, right? A 25% increase in variable costs would be 75,000, gives us 75,000. Our fixed costs stay the same, of 30,000, gives us 45,000, and 45,000 divided by 30,000 would give us 1.5. So we take off the 1, be a 50. So that's a 50% increase, 2 times 25%. So that works out. Now, that being said, your degree of operating leverage changes every time your sales volume changes. So now they have a new degree of operating leverage. Their new degree of operating leverage is 75,000 divided by 45,000. And so it's now 1.667. It was 2 before. Okay, so that's going to change. Now let's go ahead and do the crispy cake, KK. There we have 15,000 times 8. Again, we have 120,000. Their variable cost per unit is 3. Oops. Be 45,000. Means their contribution margin is 75,000. Their fixed costs were 45,000. And so their profit was 30,000, the exact same operating income as Tasty Cake. However, their degree of operating leverage, 75,000 divided by 30,000, is 2.5. All right, so let's do the same thing. We're going to increase their sales by 25%, and we get 150,000 there. Increase their variable costs, goes up to 56,250. That gives our contribution margin is 93,750 minus the 45,000. Gives us 48,750. And if we divide that by 30,000, we get 1.625, which is 2. 1.625 is 2.5 times. 2.5 times 25%, so 62.5. So yeah. Okay, so that's how that works. Go ahead and I'll go ahead and um, figure out. Let's see, Part B. They want to, assuming sales volume for each company will decline by 10% and their cost structures will not. So now we're going to do the same thing, except we're going to decline by 10%. So 120. So now our sales is going to go to 108. We're going to have half of that, so 54 will be our variable costs. Gives us 54. Contribution margin minus fixed costs of 30 would be 24,000. So our sales declined by 10%. Our profit declined by 2 times 10% or 20%, right? 6,000 is 20% of 30,000. And let's see what happens to KK, Crispy Cake. So they're also going to go down to 108. Their variable costs are going to be 40,500. So our contribution margin is 67,500. Our variable costs are 45,000. 22,500 is our new operating income. So our sales went down by 10%. We predicted it would go down by 25%. And let's see, what was it? We had 30,000 before. That's 7,500 divided by 30,000. And that is 25%. So that worked out on that. All right. One thing I'll note about operating leverage, you have to be. This is real world stuff. This isn't stuff you're going to find in business in the tests and stuff like that. Is that when most of us, when we think about leverage in business, we think about financial leverage, which is borrowing money, right? But this operating leverage, because lots of times, not always, but lots of times we can trade variable costs for fixed costs. So we take on more fixed costs and less variable costs. So if our demand goes up, we end up making more profit. But if our demand goes down, we end up, it's like a teeter-totter. It's exaggerated on the downside because we still have to cover those fixed costs. What a lot of people don't take into account is if you have high degree of financial leverage and a high degree of operating leverage, you're really structuring your business, betting on things are going to work out for you. If they do work out, that's great. And what's kind of hidden in there that people don't take into consideration is the way that I get a high degree of operating leverage is I invest in fixed costs, which usually means things like automated assembly lines, robotics, that sort of, when we're talking about actual manufacturing, and getting rid of our variable costs. And the way we get those robotics and equipment is we have to buy them and we have to borrow money to buy them. So lots of times when our degree of operating leverage goes up, unless we're funding it out of profits, which is fine, great if we can. But if we're not funding it out of profits, we're going out and borrowing it. We often double our leverage without thinking about it, without realizing that we're doubling our leverage. And, companies can get in trouble. by doing that. So anyway, that's something to think about when you talk about the degree of operating leverage. So I will post this, and we will make some more videos probably tomorrow on the next two chapters, chapters 10 and 11.